On our anniversary, my wife revealed she was pregnant with my brother's child. It was supposed to be a special night, our wedding anniversary. The restaurant was dimly lit, candles flickering softly on the table between us. I had planned everything down to the last detail. The reservation, the wine, the walk down memory lane where we would reminisce about our early years together. But as the night progressed, something felt off. Emily wasn't her usual self. She was quiet, withdrawn, as if her mind was elsewhere. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself she was just tired from work or maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by the day. But the way she kept looking at me, like she had something heavy weighing on her, made me anxious. We were halfway through dinner when she set her fork down and looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. My heart sank immediately. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation about work stress or minor disagreements. This was something deeper, something that would change everything. "Jason," she started, her voice shaking slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." I froze. My mind raced through 100 possibilities, but nothing could have prepared me for what she was about to say. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the words didn't register. Pregnant. That's good, right? We had talked about starting a family. I should be happy. But the look on her face told me there was more to this. "But," she continued, her voice breaking, "the baby isn't yours." Time seemed to stop. I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she had just said. My mind went blank, and then a slow, creeping dread began to take over. The baby wasn't mine? What was she saying? Who could it be? And then she dropped the second bombshell. "It's your brother's." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My brother? No. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare. I sat there, unable to speak, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of shock, betrayal, and disbelief. I could barely breathe. Emily's words echoed in my head like a haunting refrain, "It's your brother's." I stood up from the table so quickly that my chair nearly tipped over. I couldn't stay there, couldn't look at her. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest it felt like it might burst. Without a word, I walked out of the restaurant, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it did nothing to clear my head. I stumbled down the street, feeling like I was about to be sick. My brother. My own flesh and blood. How could he? How could she? I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away from it all. From the betrayal, from the lies, from the life I thought I had. I don't remember how I ended up at my brother's house that night. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I knew was that I needed answers, and I needed them from him. My phone had buzzed nonstop with calls and texts from Emily, but I ignored every single one. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. Every time I saw her name flash on the screen, the anger burned hotter in my chest. When I pulled into my brother Derek's driveway, my hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the impossible. How long had this been going on? How could my own brother, the person I had trusted more than anyone, have done this to me? I slammed the car door shut and stormed up to his front door, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't knock. I just pounded on the door with my fists until Derek finally opened it, a look of confusion on his face. "Jason? What the hell, man? What's going on?" he asked, clearly not expecting me to show up at his door in the middle of the night. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just stood there, staring at him, the man I had grown up with, shared my life with. My brother. The words caught in my throat, but the anger surged through me, giving me the push I needed. "How could you?" I finally spat out, my voice trembling with rage. "How could you do this to me?" Derek's confusion shifted to concern, but I wasn't buying it. He knew what I was talking about. He had to. "What are you talking about?" he asked, stepping closer, his brow furrowed. "Emily," I shouted, my voice cracking. "She told me everything, Derek. She's pregnant, and it's your baby." The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The shock, the guilt, it was all there, plain as day. He didn't even try to deny it. He didn't have to. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. "I trusted you," I shouted, my fists clenching at my sides. "You're my brother, Derek. How could you betray me like this?" Derek's face crumpled, and he took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "Jason, God, I don't even know what to say. I never meant for this to happen." "That's what you have to say? You never meant for this to happen?" I could barely contain my rage. "You slept with my wife, Derek. You went behind my back, and now she's pregnant with your child. How am I supposed to even begin to process that?" He took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he spoke. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, Jason. It just happened." The words, "it just happened," were like a slap in the face. Like it was some kind of accident, something that just slipped out of his control. But it wasn't. They both made the choice, and now I was the one left to deal with the consequences. Why? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why did you do it? Derek shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. I don't know, man. I don't know. I was stupid. I made a mistake, and I wish I could take it all back. But I can't. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm so sorry. His apology felt hollow. Empty. There were no words that could fix this, no apology that could make me feel any less betrayed. My whole world had been torn apart, and the person who had helped destroy it was standing right in front of me. I trusted you, I repeated, my voice breaking. You were my brother? You were supposed to have my back, not stab me in it. Derek didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the ground, ashamed. But shame wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. I turned and walked away, not even sure where I was going. I couldn't be there anymore. I couldn't stand to look at him. I needed space. I needed time to think. To figure out what to do next. As I drove away from his house, the weight of the betrayal settled in even deeper. My wife had cheated on me with my own brother, and now they were having a child together. A child that should have been mine. What was I supposed to do with that? The days following that night were a blur. I moved through life like a ghost, barely able to focus on anything. The betrayal haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's tearful confession and Derek's guilt-ridden face. My phone continued to light up with calls and texts from both of them, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could they possibly say to make this right? I stayed at a hotel, avoiding home, avoiding my family. I didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to hear anyone's advice or sympathy. The thought of facing my parents, explaining that their sons had been torn apart by something so unforgivable, was unbearable. They would never understand. Hell, I didn't even understand. On the third day of my self-imposed exile, I found myself sitting on the hotel bed, staring blankly at the TV, the news playing in the background. But I wasn't really paying attention. My mind was still back at that restaurant, replaying Emily's words over and over again, like a twisted record on repeat. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Emily. She stood there in the hallway, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair disheveled. She hadn't been sleeping either, clearly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. Can I come in? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to slam the door in her face, to walk away from this, from her. But part of me, maybe the part that still loved her, the part that had built a life with her, wanted answers. Wanted closure. Reluctantly, I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the middle of the room, wringing her hands nervously, as if she didn't know where to begin. Jason, she finally said, her voice trembling, I'm so sorry. I know there's nothing I can say that will make this better, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping my distance, my arms crossed. Sorry doesn't change what you did, Emily, I said, my voice cold. You destroyed everything. You and Derek. You went behind my back for God knows how long, and now there's a baby involved. She winced at my words, but she didn't argue. I know I messed up. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I hate myself for it. But, Jason, I never wanted to hurt you. Then why? I asked, my voice rising with frustration. Why did you do it? Why him, of all people? My own brother? She looked down at her feet, as if she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. I don't have a good answer for that, she admitted. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you it was some kind of momentary lapse in judgment, but it wasn't. I think she paused, struggling to find the right words. I think I felt disconnected from us. From you. And I turned to Derek because he was there. It wasn't about love, Jason. It was a mistake. A mistake? I scoffed. Sleeping with my brother and getting pregnant is more than a mistake, Emily. It's a betrayal of everything we built together. How am I supposed to forgive that? How am I supposed to move past this? Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy for her. Not anymore. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. I didn't want to lie to you anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing. So, what now? I asked. What do you want me to do, Emily? Stay with you? Pretend like this didn't happen? Raise my brother's child like it's mine? I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know what to do, Jason. I just know I can't lose you. I love you. I stopped pacing and turned to face her, feeling the weight of her words. I love you. But love wasn't enough, was it? Not anymore. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice firm. I can't stay in a marriage where every time I look at you, I'll see him. Where every time I think about the future, I'll remember the child that isn't mine. You made your choice, Emily. Now I have to make mine. She started to cry, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. So, what does that mean? She asked through her tears. It means I'm leaving, I said, my voice steady but cold. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the only path forward. There was no going back. Emily sobbed, collapsing onto the couch, but I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the hotel room, leaving her behind. As I drove away, a million thoughts raced through my head, but one thing was certain, my life as I knew it was over. What came next, I wasn't sure. But at least I wouldn't have to face it with the weight of betrayal hanging over me. After leaving Emily in that hotel room, the realization of what was happening started to sink in. Divorce. It was a word I never thought would apply to my life, but now, it was the only option. As much as I loved her once, the betrayal had carved too deep a wound. There was no coming back from it. I spent the next few days avoiding everyone, friends, family, and especially my parents. I knew that eventually, I'd have to explain things, but I wasn't ready. I couldn't even wrap my own head around what had happened. The thought of telling them that their sons, the two boys they'd raised together, were torn apart by something as ugly as infidelity, it made me sick. But avoidance could only last so long. One afternoon, my father called. I stared at his name on the screen, debating whether to let it go to voicemail, but something in me snapped. It was time. I needed to face this head-on, even if it ripped my family apart. "Hey, Dad," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jason, where the hell have you been?" His voice was stern but filled with concern. "We've been worried sick. Your mom has been calling Emily, and no one's answering. What's going on?" I swallowed hard. This was it. The moment of truth. I left, Dad. I'm not with Emily anymore. What? His confusion was clear. What do you mean you left? What's going on between you two? There was no easy way to say it. I could feel the knot tightening in my chest as I forced the words out. Emily, she's pregnant, Dad. But it's not mine. It's Derek's. Silence. It was like I could feel the weight of my father's disbelief through the phone. For a moment, he said nothing, and I almost wished I hadn't told him. But there was no taking it back now. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and disbelieving. What are you talking about? Derek? Your brother? That doesn't make any sense. I wish it didn't, but it's true. Emily and Derek were having an affair. She told me on our anniversary. She's pregnant with his child. There was another long pause, and when my dad spoke again, his voice was filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. My God, Jason. I don't even know what to say. How could they do this? I don't know, I muttered. I've been asking myself that every day since I found out. But it doesn't matter now. I'm done. I've already decided to file for divorce. Divorce, my dad repeated, his voice heavy with the weight of it. I can't believe this is happening. Your mom, she's going to be devastated. I know, I said, feeling a pang of guilt. My parents had always been proud of how close Derek and I were, how we supported each other through thick and thin. This would shatter that image. What about Derek? Dad asked, his voice growing harder. Have you spoken to him? I confronted him, I admitted. He didn't deny it. Said it was a mistake, but I don't care. He destroyed everything between us. My dad sighed, the sound of a man struggling to comprehend how his family had fallen apart so quickly. I don't know what to say, son. It's beyond anything I could have imagined. But we'll get through it, okay? Whatever happens, your mom and I are here for you. Thanks, Dad, I said quietly. But I don't know how to move forward from this. I feel like I've lost everything. You haven't lost us, he said firmly. No matter what, we're still your family. His words offered some comfort, but I couldn't help feeling like the family I once knew was gone forever. How could things ever go back to normal after this? My brother had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and no amount of apologies would change that. Later that day, I received a call from Derek. It was the first time he had tried reaching out since that night. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but something inside me wanted to hear what he had to say. I answered, but I didn't speak. Jason. Derek's voice came through, hesitant. Look, I know I'm the last person you want to talk to right now, but I need to say something. I stayed silent, gripping the phone tightly in my hand. Derek took a deep breath before continuing. I know I can't fix this. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm begging you to at least let me explain. Please, man. I can't stand knowing I've lost you. I felt the familiar surge of anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. What is there to explain, Derek? You slept with my wife. You're having a baby with her. What could you possibly say that would change anything? I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quickly. I don't. I'm sorry. I hate myself for what I did, and I can't live with the idea that I've ruined our family. I need you to know that it wasn't about you. It wasn't about trying to hurt you. You didn't think about me at all, I shot back. That's the problem. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Jason. I wish I could take it all back. For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I was just tired of carrying so much anger. But I realized that while I couldn't forgive him, I also couldn't keep drowning in this rage. It was destroying me, and it would keep destroying me if I let it. I can't forgive you, Derek, I said, my voice cold but steady. But I'm done fighting. I'm moving on. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I just hope you can live with yourself. There was a long silence on the other end, and when Derek finally spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I understand. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. It wasn't peace, not by a long shot, but it was something. I had said what I needed to say. Now, it was time to figure out what came next. A few weeks had passed since I had that conversation with Derek, but the pain still lingered. Every day felt like a new struggle, trying to adapt to a life that was no longer mine. I went through the motions, filed for divorce, started looking for a new place to live, and avoided every call or message from Emily and Derek. They were ghosts to me now, reminders of everything I'd lost. I packed up the house in silence, boxing up the remnants of what had once been a happy marriage. Each item I placed in a box felt like a stab to the heart, a wedding photo here, a souvenir from a vacation there. It was the end of something I thought would last forever. When I finally moved out, I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me in that house, only memories that hurt too much to keep. I spent the next few days at my parents' place, trying to gather the strength to move on. My mother was devastated, of course. She couldn't understand how Derek, her golden boy, could do something so horrible. My dad tried to keep things together, but even he couldn't hide his disappointment. The family was fractured, broken beyond repair. One evening, as I sat on the back porch, my father joined me, 2 beers in hand. He handed me one without a word and sat down next to me. We drank in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Jason, he finally said, his voice low, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. What Derek and Emily did, it's on them, not you. I know, I replied quietly. But it doesn't make it any easier. He nodded, taking a slow sip from his beer. I get that. But you've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't let this destroy everything. You're stronger than this. I appreciated his words, but they didn't quite reach me. Not yet. I was still too deep in the hurt to see a future beyond the betrayal. Still, it was nice to know my parents were on my side, even if I couldn't fix what had been broken. A few days later, I finally received the official divorce papers. It felt surreal, seeing it all laid out in black and white, the end of a marriage, the end of everything I had once believed in. I stared at my name next to Emily's for a long time before signing the final document. It was done. It was over. I drove the papers to my lawyer's office, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. As I handed them over, I felt a strange sense of relief. The burden was finally lifted, even if it left me feeling hollow. But the biggest challenge still lay ahead, facing Emily one last time. We had agreed to meet to finalize everything, return keys, divide the last of our shared possessions, and say goodbye. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I knew it had to be done. Closure, in the most painful form. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. When I walked in, I saw her sitting at a small table, looking down at her phone. She looked different, tired, worn out. Maybe the guilt had taken its toll, or maybe she was just as exhausted as I was. Either way, I felt no sympathy. I sat down across from her without a word, and for a moment, we just sat in silence. It was strange, being this close to her and feeling nothing but emptiness. The love that had once been there had vanished, replaced by a void. Jason, she began softly, her eyes red and swollen, I'm sorry for everything. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know. I never meant to hurt you. I nodded, but didn't respond. I had heard her apologies too many times, and they no longer held any weight. I wish things could have been different, she continued, her voice shaky. But I understand why you're doing this. I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me. Forgiveness. That word felt so foreign now. How could I forgive something like this? But as I looked at her, I realized something important. I didn't need to forgive her. I just needed to let go. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, Emily, I said honestly. But I'm done holding on to this. I can't live my life carrying this anger around anymore. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand. We exchanged the final few items, keys, papers, everything that tied us together. As I stood up to leave, I felt lighter, like I was finally stepping out from under the cloud that had been hanging over me for months. Before I walked away, I turned to her one last time. "Good luck, Emily," I said softly. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." And then, I walked out. No more anger. No more hurt. Just freedom. As I drove away, I didn't feel the crushing weight of the past anymore. I felt possibility. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare me. It felt like a chance to start over. To rebuild. To be free from the pain that had once consumed me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done living in the shadow of betrayal. This was my life now, and it was time to take it back. The months following the final meeting with Emily were some of the most challenging of my life. At first, I wandered through the days in a sort of haze, unsure of how to rebuild my life after everything had crumbled around me. I had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the memories of the life I had shared with Emily. It was a fresh start, but it felt lonely, foreign, and at times, unbearable. Every corner of my new place felt empty. There was no familiar warmth, no personal touches, just a cold reminder of how everything had fallen apart. It took weeks before I could even unpack the boxes of my old life. Every item felt like a ghost of the past, memories of a marriage, a brother, a life I no longer had. One evening, I sat in my living room, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days, isolating myself as I tried to come to terms with everything. I thought about calling my parents, but what could I say? That I felt lost? That I didn't know how to move on? Suddenly, my phone buzzed, breaking the silence. I reached for it, half expecting it to be another text from Derek or Emily, both of whom I had blocked months ago. But when I glanced at the screen, I was surprised to see a message from an old friend, Ryan. We hadn't spoken in years, not since he moved to the West Coast, but he had heard about my situation through the grapevine. "Hey, man," the message read. "I heard what happened. I'm really sorry. If you need to get away for a while, you're welcome to crash at my place in California. It might do you some good." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to reject the offer outright, to continue wallowing in my misery alone. But another part of me, the part that was tired of feeling trapped in the past, saw this as an opportunity. A chance to break free, to escape the memories that haunted every corner of my current life. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Thanks, Ryan. I might take you up on that." 2 weeks later, I found myself stepping off a plane in Los Angeles. The warm California air hit me as I walked through the airport, a stark contrast to the chilly winter back home. Ryan picked me up and we drove through the city, the palm trees and ocean views making everything feel so different, almost surreal. It was the first time in a long time that I felt alive. Ryan's place was a small but comfortable apartment near the beach. We spent the first few days catching up, reminiscing about old times and talking about anything but my failed marriage. He understood that I wasn't ready to dive back into those painful memories, and I appreciated his patience. One evening, after a long day of walking along the beach, Ryan and I sat outside on his balcony, watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean. The colors of the sky blended together in a breathtaking display, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. "Do you think you'll ever go back?" Ryan asked, his voice casual but laced with curiosity. I thought about it for a moment, taking in the serene view before answering. "I don't know. Maybe one day. But right now, I think I just need to focus on moving forward." Ryan nodded, understanding. "Well, you're always welcome to stay here as long as you need." "Thanks, man," I said, grateful for his support. "I appreciate it." Over the next few weeks, I started to rediscover pieces of myself that I had lost over the years. I took up new hobbies, surfing, hiking, even painting, things I had never considered before but found surprisingly therapeutic. I met new people, made new friends, and slowly, bit by bit, began to feel like myself again. The pain of what had happened with Emily and Derek still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I wasn't the man whose wife had betrayed him, or whose brother had shattered their bond. I was just Jason, someone who had been through hell but was still standing. One day, while sitting on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized something profound. I didn't need closure from Emily or Derek. I didn't need an apology or an explanation. What I needed was to let go. To truly forgive, not them, but myself. To forgive myself for holding on to the anger, for letting the betrayal consume me for so long. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the ocean wash over me, and took a deep breath. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how I moved forward. And for the first time, I was ready. A few months later, I returned home. It wasn't the same place I had left. There was a sense of finality, of something new on the horizon. My divorce was finalized, and my relationship with my family, though strained, had begun to heal. My parents had accepted the situation, and while things with Derek were still distant, we had both agreed to move on. I found a new apartment in a different part of the city, far from the memories of my old life. It was a small place, but it was mine, a blank slate, a fresh start. I filled it with new furniture, new art, and new memories, determined to make this new chapter of my life one filled with hope and possibility. Every now and then, I'd think back to that night, when Emily told me she was pregnant with Derek's child. It still hurt, but it no longer consumed me. I had learned to live with the pain, to accept it as part of my story, but not the end of it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that, I realized, was all I really needed.